It's time to scrap the existing gun certificate system across England and Wales and replace it with another. That's the conclusion of a Basque review that included a series of freedom of information requests to find out the scale of the crisis that firearms licensing faces. In a new report, Basque finds major inconsistencies in the service provided by the 42 separate firearms licensing departments in England and Wales. The figures show that the cost of processing firearms licence applications can differ from different police forces by up to 6 times, as little as £87 in the Somerset and Avon area, but more than £500 in Durham. Basque says firearms licensing inconsistencies are symptomatic of wider police failures.
There are two possible alternatives as we see it. One is that you actually would have a centralised firearms licensing. And the hope would be, while certain aspects of firearms licensing would still have to be done locally, you'd still have to have local firearms inquiry officers. But the fact that you had a national overview would hopefully do away with a lot of the differences, sometimes inefficiencies, which are inbuilt into forces.
Significant delays in processing applications has been recorded in different police forces. The average turnaround time is around 40 days in areas like Hertfordshire, but up to 178 days in Cumbria.
It's a really unfair situation on so many shotgun certificate holders and so many firearms licence holders that they're not being treated the same. For a lot of people, their livelihood depends on it. For many people, their fun depends on it. You know, shooting is a sport for many people, and it is just unfair that there are these disparities across the country, and we need to get the 42 police forces to really wake up and understand that this has got a huge impact on the economy, it's got a huge impact on people's lives, it's got a huge impact particularly on farmers who rely on their shotguns for crop protection and pest control. It's just not fair that we're in this situation. We've got to get it right.
Basque says the issues are hurting both the shooting community and the gun trade. It blames police failures for an 8% reduction in certificate holders over the last 2 years. This has led to a loss of 47,000 applicants and a loss of more than £100 million to the economy. Livens Gun Shop in Staffordshire is one of many shops suffering.
They're obviously waiting on their tickets, so they're having to order stuff with us or put deposits down, and then it's affecting us because of storage, you know, because we've got a lot of guns waiting to go out that, you know, people obviously can't walk out the shop with because they haven't got their tickets. People that need them for their work, it's going to have quite a big impact on them, because obviously, you know, if they're doing pest control or deer management or something like that, it is going to cause them issues. So I can understand the frustration.
The report recommends the unification of licensing as seen in Scotland, or the creation of an independent regulator to ensure failing forces are held to account.
Having worked in a small national unit myself, once you take resources from all the 42 forces, someone has to pay for them. Now, the Home Office aren't going to suddenly invent additional money, so the likelihood is if you were to create a national unit for firearms licensing, each of those forces would have to contribute to it. So how much would they have to contribute? Would it depend on how many licence holders you've got? What happens if all the licence holders from one particular area had more appeals than others? So I think saying that all the forces would have to contribute, which is what they generally do for these, would be complicated.
England and Wales are not alone in dealing with delays. The Police Service of Northern Ireland recently declared a critical incident in their firearms and explosives branch, following a backlog of 4,000 individuals. The critical incident is ongoing, as so far nothing has changed.
Critical incident means that you have to actually have chief officer oversight. And I think there are probably some forces which do have major problems, and I'm not sure that perhaps chief officers are fully aware of them. And if they are fully aware of them, it's clear to me that it isn't a priority.
Former Home Secretary Priti Patel's guidance in November 2021 led to several forces slowing or stopping their firearms licensing, with Hampshire Police among many blaming a COVID backlog. Cumbria Police recently suspended its grant service, though it is still dealing with variations and renewals. Bask says that this is likely to become common among forces.
And I think there are quite a number of forces who are probably in that situation. What Cumbria have done is been upfront. I think there are probably a number of forces that, to all intents and purposes, whilst they might be accepting grants, if you're not processing a grant within 12 to 15 months, then effectively the process is suspended.
The National Police Chiefs Council lead for firearms licensing, Chief Constable Debbie Tedds, says chief officers always have to make difficult operational decisions regarding the allocation of resources based on an assessment of the level of threat and risk in their force areas. The number of applications forces receive also greatly differ across the country, so comparisons in performance are not always feasible. We're working closely with forces to improve the processes behind firearm licensing applications and renewals.
One of the first statements in the Home Office guidelines states that it's a privilege and not a right to own a firearm. And I think back in 2013, a Home Affairs Select Committee looked at firearms licensing as a burden on the police. So that's the position that we're coming from. It's really something they'd rather not have.
Bask hopes the government will take urgent action to tackle the crisis and address the inconsistencies.